Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Seaweed Brain, a Percy Jackson podcast, still on Iaya. We're still doing Circe by Madeline Miller. This is going to be our fourth section on this book, and today is finally the day for Odysseus. It's a big deal. Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
If you went on a road trip and you didn't stop for a Big Mac or drop a crispy fry between the car seats or use your McDonald's bag as a placemat, then that wasn't a road trip. It was just a really long drive. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.
This episode is brought to you by Starbucks. Smooth, bright, deliciously crafted. Introducing Starbucks Sincera Blend, their smoothest, brightest coffee yet. It's a new kind of light roast, one that's packed with so much flavor, it shines no matter how you brew it. So go ahead and try it hot, iced, black, or with a splash of creamer. Visit athome.starbucks.com/Sincera-blend-coffee to bring Starbucks Sincera Blend home.
Welcome back to Seaweed Brain, live from Iaya. We are here today to discuss chapters 15 through 17 of Circe by Madeline Miller, and we are joined today by recently proclaimed New York Times bestselling author Kyle Prue. What's up, Kyle?
Hello. I've come a long way since my first appearance on the Seaweed Brain.
Isn't it cute? When you were first here, we were talking about the Feud trilogy and the Sparks by Kyle Prue.
Yeah, and now I won't even talk about those publicly, which is funny.
I know, I was kind of thinking about that. I was like, published author Kyle Prue, and I was like, wait. Kyle Prue's been a published author.
Yeah, it's so funny that like so many people when How to Piss Off Men came out and they were like, and look what TikTok does. Now you're a published author. And I was like, yeah, yes, whatever you want, whatever you say.
But now you don't get to do like middle school visits with your current book.
Yes, that's true. Yes. I do miss being in a middle school for 10 and a half hours.
10 and a half hours?
Yeah, because like I used to go to like high schools and they would just bring through giant, just sort of like assemblies over and over and over again. And I sold less books in 1 year than I did on the first day How to Piss Off Men came out, which is so funny.
Growth.
Yes. Well, that's what you get for writing like TikTok humor rather than like, teenage broad fantasy.
Yeah, for those of you who may not be familiar somehow with the eternally famous Kyle Prue, his book is called How to Piss Off Men. So perhaps today we should do some like intertextual comp lit style analysis between Circe by Madeline Miller, these chapters, and How to Piss Off Men by Kyle Prue.
Here's what I'll say is that in rereading Circe, I was like, this book is very much how to piss off women. She is so thoroughly wronged over and over and over and over again. I was reading the opening chapters with her and Glaucus or whatever, and she like makes him a god, and then he just immediately is like, all right, later, loser. And I was like, you can't trust anybody, girl. Like,
no. You saying that reminded me, I always picture Glaucus as the animated King Trident from the SpongeBob SquarePants movie.
Yes.
Literally,
I
exactly.
also do.
Yes.
That is so fucking crazy.
With the hamburger competition. It's the same personality, too.
The window into my brain that you just opened.
Yeah.
I think it's because he's blue and he's like fishy. I was like, that's him. Yes.
That's literally him. We're going to talk about that movie. Wait, is it that the movie? There's a bunch of SpongeBob movies.
Is it not King Neptune?
Probably. I'm sorry I'm not up to date on my specific SpongeBob lore. It's been a while.
I mean, I'm not, which is the only reason we're finding out about this is that I have to Google. But he looks like Trident in mythology.
Yeah.
But like the wiki says that the character's name is King Neptune.
Are you watching it for the podcast?
We are going to do the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, the one where David Hasselhoff carries them through his pecs as an adaptation of the Odyssey.
It is.
It is.
It is.
If you want a guest, you can come on for it.
Of course.
I think we've talked about your relationship with the Odyssey because you first came on the podcast to talk about the Sea of Monsters. What is your relationship specifically with Circe, this book, And why did you ask to come on today for this set of chapters?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I moved schools like 4 or 5 times in 4 or 5 years, sort of my Odyssey. And for whatever reason, every school I went to happened to be reading the Odyssey that year. So I have read it in like every translation so many times over and over and over again. And I do think like Circe is one of my favorite books, but I think in totality, I think like the reason why I love this book so much is because I think Madeline Miller is really phenomenal at examining the emotional reality of a situation, like within a myth. I think so many things you read in myth are so like interesting, but they never really talk about the way that anyone actually feels. And they never talk about the emotional reality of experiencing these things. And I think the way in which she describes Odysseus within this book, I think, is the most nuanced and like powerful description of him. Additionally, rereading it this time, I was I felt some shame at my Odyssey tattoo. I
was wondering when we were going to bring that one up.
Yes. I like, because I remember reading it back this time, this stretch of chapters and being like, love him. And then remember getting to the end of the book and being like, oh, well, not all of this is canon, surely.
The canon is an ever-evolving thing.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's so beautiful. I think that the way in which she describes or brings Odysseus into this story is like the only living Greek guy who understands subtext. It seems so much like he's like the only one who's able to have kind of like a nuanced, feeling about anything, which is actually what makes him so thoroughly dangerous to other humans, is that his intelligence really is just like being able to say something other than what he means.
Have you read The Three-Body Problem?
No, I haven't.
That is like the entire spoiler, I guess, for that entire series. But that's kind of the entire thing that separates like humanity from the aliens, and what like ultimately, this is a spoiler. Skip 15 seconds if you don't want to be spoiled. Allows humanity to triumph over aliens is that the aliens cannot lie. That they like literally do not understand what it means to say something that they are not thinking. And so humans can just lie their way out of total annihilation.
That is awesome.
Okay, and that being said, we were doing this as a fun exercise because this book is so sprawling and covers so many people and experiences and such a broad expanse of time and themes. If there was one word you would use to summarize, like this is what this book is about, what would you say?
I think, okay, I got it. I have the word. I think this book is about strain.
Strain.
And I think that like what I think Circe and Odysseus recognize in each other is that like someone says in the book, like even the best steel grows brittle if you beat it enough.
Yes, that's in this section.
And yeah, and I think like in general, Circe is exhausted by her immortality. And so like I do think this is a book all about strain. It's like how much can one person go through? Mm-hmm. And Odysseus kind of handles it on a tighter timetable, but that is her whole, like every time anybody shows up, I'm like, oh God, what now?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that's something that they have in common, Circe and Odysseus, because we're going to get into this section today. And I was really interested in how like the experience that she has right prior to him landing on her island primes her to be ready to take him in and for him to be like her person. Like, she may not have had this kind of emotional experience with him if she had not been in the space that she was when he arrived. So that being said, brief content warning for the rest of this episode, because of the content of the previous chapters and these chapters, discussion of sexual assault and PTSD going forward. So we left off last week with Circe experiencing violence and then taking up her mantle as like witch who turns men into pigs. And because that happened last week, this is now like the PTSD section. It's the Odysseus section, but it's also her dealing with PTSD. It's like very difficult to read the first part of this chapter 15. She's like totally dissociating from her body, cleaning everything, wondering if her father is ever going to come, grappling with her own loneliness, and kind of just like floating through her days.
Yeah, there's a ghostliness. A lot of these sections, as we are chunking the book, we kind of ebb in and out of this style of narration that reminds us of what it was like at the beginning when she is a child with no life lying on the floor of Helios's palace, where like the style gets much more short, clipped, vague.
Like, we don't know how much time is passing.
Yeah, exactly. There's a sense of like emotional remove. I guess what it gives is dissociation, that her narrative is so emotionless, factual, like unpoetic for these sections where she's going through something, recovering from something.
Yeah, there was one line that really stuck out to me at the beginning of this section. Like you said, the writing is very strange. It's like not clear exactly where we are, and like her thoughts are just kind of lobbing together. And she talks about the phrase "know thyself." She says, quote, "But I had been a stranger to myself, turned to stone for no reason I could name," which felt to me like a really intentional allusion to our other like most zeitgeisty myth about sexual assault in Medusa, and like specifically referencing that. I don't think Madeline Miller is going to write a Medusa book, but if she did, how would we imagine the emotional life of what the woman in that myth went through after what Circe just went through? And then there was this really interesting like parable that she leads into, this like story that she is recalling Daedalus telling her about having to fix people's houses and finding out that the structure of their homes is filled with rot, and that in order to like truly fix their homes, you need to like tear it down and build them again all over again. And she says, that's what I'm going to do. Got to tear it down and build it up again. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant at first.
Yeah, I think it's ambiguous what she's referring to here. Like, if this is about herself as a person, that seems plausible. But also, I think contextually, like, I don't know that she's really tearing herself down. It seems maybe better pitched at the idea of masculinity or men, because this transitional section isn't just her recovery. This is where we see this pig transformation practice becoming a routine, a habit for her. Like at the end of chapter 14, where we left off, she is assaulted and does this for the first time as sort of like a defense mechanism. We're watching her move into an era where, I mean, it still is in self-defense in the sense that most of these men do wish her harm and would do violence to her, but she also is choosing, say, like, not to repel them from the island, and she is willingly trying to do this dance and to repeat this exercise of giving them an opportunity to become their worst selves and then punishing them for becoming their worst selves by turning them into pigs. And having her, I don't know, how would you read the emotional journey in this? I feel like some of the language is vaguely healing oriented, but it doesn't seem like that's necessarily what's going on or how this is manifesting for her.
It made me think of when we covered Antigone Rising on the podcast way, way back in the day, and how there was a lot of talk in that book of essays by Dr. Helen Morales about how revenge stories are such a productive and healing treatment for people who have like suffered trauma, that it is like actually very helpful to imagine like enacting revenge on the people who have wronged you, but like only to a certain degree. So like she has to go through this process of revenge, but that's not like her final step towards her healing. I do think it's like was the only option for her. I don't think she writes about it in her perspective as something that she feels like amazing about having done.
Yeah, the opposite, perhaps.
Yeah, this, in addition to the PTSD section, the Odysseus section, this is also the knife section. The amount of times she brings up the knife as like a feeling she is feeling. Charlie XCX, We Have Many Mothers. The first time she mentions that, page 194, it was not desire. She's speaking about how not all men are pigs, right? She said, not all men. Some of these men, they're cute, they're religious maybe, they're not gonna hurt me. I'll take them to my bed. I won't turn him into a pig. I'll let him go even. But it was not desire, not even its barest scrapings. It was a sort of rage, a knife I used upon myself. I did it to prove my skin was still my own. And did I like the answer I found? She doesn't answer. Typical, for what she's going through right now. Trying to like reclaim her physical body. But then she's going to use that knife statement again to talk about Odysseus like many, many times. She's in this phase of turning all these men into pigs and doing it over and over again and just kind of like dissociating. She says she has to keep going, quote, because I really like this line. I moved straight back as if a great brimming bowl rested in my hands. The dark liquid rippled as I walked, always at the point of overflow, yet never flowing. Only if I stopped, if I lay down, did I begin to feel it bleed. And that's the moment she's in her life, like lowest we have seen her when Odysseus arrives. Kyle, I think, set us up well by saying we have complicated feelings about him.
Yeah. I think like the second he shows up, Madeline Miller draws a delineation between him and everybody else. And that the first thing that he notices is the stool on its side.
Mhm.
That he has no interest in riches and like no interest in her things. And I mean, of course, like he does know what he's walking into, but from her perspective, this is the first guy that's walked in and been like, uh-oh, you know, and I think like, I mean, it makes sense. He's so finely tuned to danger. And, you know, I think the Odyssey in general, like any myth, offers temptation over and over and over and over again. And that temptation always leads to ruination. Like anytime anybody who is with Odysseus wants something, you know, it always like this entire journey like turns into dead people. So I think that there are a lot of ways in which it is like clearly indicated. She's like, oh, this guy's, there's something different about him.
Yeah.
He's also heavily foreshadowed in this in a way that no other characters are. We have this prophecy from Hermes that is brought back up again here that she's thinking about. She knows his name ahead of time. But also, like, in the narration, like, really shortly before he appears, there's this moment where she's talking about her, like, dissociation, turning men into pigs era of her life, in which there's an insert of her having a conversation with Odysseus reflecting back upon this and him asking why pigs and stuff, but not dropping his name yet. That I found to be so fascinating and effective as a device, foreshadowing someone who's going to come 3 pages down the line, who is probably the most famous calling card in the book and also not saying his name, really gives you the sense of, in the story of her life, how this figure is slotting in.
I also think, like we said, she's so concerned throughout the entirety of the book with what the bards are going to say and how the songs are going to depict her. She knows as a narrator who she is speaking to, like what we know, like that we would come into this story knowing Odysseus. She doesn't need to name him in order to foreshadow him coming in 3 pages later. Like she knows that it's almost like a winking irony. Like, I know that you're reading this because you know Odysseus is about to show up and he's going to show up and I don't even need to tell you what his freaking name is because I know why you're here, because the bard sent you. It is this frustrating, I think nuance is a great word for it, Kyle, because it's this frustrating feeling of like, ooh, she's really into him. She knows he's different. He is seeing the stool. He's talking about the loom. She's like, no man who has stepped foot in my home ever had ever mentioned my loom. Great, I'm so excited for you. But also, girl, bar hell. Deeper, the bar is in Tartarus.
He appears to be the first person who has an active conversation with her, like, pretty much ever. At least, like, I think, like, the only human man. Like, I'm trying to, like, I think, you know, Jason is before this. That dude is completely empty-headed, you know? And, like, the tattoo that I have from the Odyssey is the word polytropos, which means of many turnings, which throughout the Odyssey is used very much to describe Odysseus and the path, which means it turns over multiple times. And so, like, the idea of, like, Odysseus being this kind of thing that's turning over all the time. So, like, you do find in their first conversation, it seems like she is having a real deal amount of trouble coming to grips with, like, what he is.
Yeah.
Like, he, like, makes her laugh, and then she's like, whoa. Like,
yeah, and I like the idea that within his many turnings and the many turnings of his personality and the many turnings he faces on his Odyssey, that we have many turnings about how we feel about this man. I think that she has many turnings over the course of this book about how she feels about him, so I can have some sympathy for her. Like, I don't think it's as simple as reading. I mean, if Ola was here, she'd probably be like, jail. Like, we don't care about him. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
But for me, and my own faults, I find myself flipping back and forth on him. Like, am I impressed that he noticed her loom? No. But do I also recognize that he is very different from every man she's ever spoken to? Yes. Except for the fact that he reminds her so much of Hermes, who he is related to, and also in many ways reminds her of Daedalus, who he, like, himself looks up to. We've been tracking Kyle, like, her different boyfriends. So this would be officially #4th boyfriend. Within the lineage of her boyfriends, like, he does track and, like, slot in pretty neatly. And I think he is a pretty appropriate #4th boyfriend.
Okay, so it's Glaucus.
Glaucus, number 1.
And then Daedalus.
Hermes, number 2.
Hermes, number 2.
Oh, Hermes, number 2.
Then Daedalus.
It actually is, like, kind of the tier of boyfriends that everyone goes through. Yeah. It kind of does feel like. It's like dude who doesn't appreciate you and does you completely wrong. Dude you barely know who you just kind of hook up with a little bit. Dude who is like the best guy ever, but whatever, timing doesn't, line up. And then, like, 4-month-long situationship that fucks you up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, like, also, like, to go from Daedalus, who was like she was like, he's not very attractive, but he's got this kind of like sturdy, patient thing.
Yeah.
There's like a daddy issue vibe going on there. To come now to Odysseus, who's like, ooh, he's hot. Like, there's a very specific line where she's like, I noticed he was attractive all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you noticed before, but you were just saying that now.
Yeah.
And she's also in her like PTSD healing from this like awful physical trauma she endured. So she's like getting with this guy who she finds to be like very physically attractive and also like kind of dangerous, like emotionally. Like,
yeah.
she knows,
Yeah.
oh, here we come with the knife. Here we come. Where's my second knife quote? 205, she's like, I'm not patient. Like, I'm reckless. I'm in my reckless era. I know that he is like a knife, but some things are worth spilling blood for. So she's ready to sign herself up for like, well, I don't know, we'll see what happens with this. Because she's like at her lowest. What could
Yeah.
possibly go wrong? And she's attracted to him.
Yeah. He's really there when she, like, he's so for this specific moment in her emotional journey where she's simultaneously at her lowest, but she, like, the consistent thread is not just about the intelligence or something, it's about surprise. Like, he is still able
Yes.
to differentiate himself from all of the other men that she's been experiencing recently, but still do so in a way that is miraculously, I would say, not productive and scary.
Yeah. I also think that like you can justify almost any action Circe takes throughout this entire novel by remembering that this girl is so bored. She's so goddamn bored. Like she like lives forever and never sees anybody. So anytime she makes like a quote unquote, like, I don't know, like reckless decision or whatever, I'm like, I would too, you know,
Yeah.
like
She's a prime example of like, she cannot possibly protect her peace too much because that's kind of her whole thing.
yeah.
Liv put it a really great way a couple episodes ago. She said, like, this book is just about what happens if a woman lives forever. Like, what happens if you give a woman eternal time to, like, fuck around and find out? She's gonna date Odysseus.
Yeah.
Except for the major stone that she does not turn over,
Oh, yes, which is lesbianism.
which is bisexuality and lesbianism. Yeah.
But that's because, I mean, yeah, well, we'll get there. We'll get there in the end. Not only does he remind her of these men, of her previous boyfriends, her great boyfriend and her great great boyfriend, he is like so in a similar place to her. Personally, he says, or she says to him, are you always so suspicious? This is in like their first interaction. And he says, what can I say? The world is an ugly place. We must live in it. And it's this like almost sad confirmation of how she's feeling. You know, it's like when two depressed people get together so they can like wallow in their like bitterness together.
That's very much what it is.
But they think they're the only ones who see how the world really is. And so it's like us versus everyone else kind of a vibe for them.
And like, to
Yeah.
her credit,
He really does get her.
yeah, there is an extent to which like everyone kind of gets it, but I do feel like she is being a little discerning. It is true that she at this point has met lots of people. She's had lots of opportunities to pursue little things with different men passing through. And he is different
Yeah.
in a way that's not necessarily productive.
I think it's interesting to like cast back to Song of Achilles, in which she writes Odysseus in like I think a smaller portion of that book than she does in this book. Like he has less of a footprint, but you start to kind of throughout that book realize or understand that Odysseus's capacity for self-deprecating humor, it's kind of shown in this book as well, is actually an extremely dangerous thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So many times throughout like a lot of these early interactions, and I think like this kind of gets twisted and by the end of the book, is that he's a really, really great talker.
Yep.
And he oftentimes does speak about things that he did and he doesn't lie, but because he's such a great talker, they come out and they seem, you know, they seem justifiable. You like understand him. And so I think like in this early conversation with like the self-deprecating humor in the beginning, that is originally what kind of like tilts her off her, you know, defense. And I think like through Song of Achilles, they kind of show over and over and over again, like that is what makes him so scary, is because he is the only Greek who has that capacity.
He's the only Greek hero of all time to have self-deprecating humor.
And he became greatest of the Greeks in the end after, you know, Achilles and Ajax and all these kind of like chest pounders who fucking ate it, because he was able to hold back and be like, I'm just going to let all these idiots die.
He importantly like doesn't totally mean it either. Like when he makes these jokes, part of the effect of them is that he is simultaneously like able to understand his limitations while still being so hubristic, and the same person who will claim his deception of Polyphemus as they're sailing away, getting the crew killed. Like, I think it's like a difficult tension sometimes to bear, but it is really like, it's a good callback to Song of Achilles, especially because like part of the way the section is written is Odysseus thinking about how Patroclus understood him as a way of trying to do the self-deprecation, saying like, oh, I was once acquainted with this nice young man who, understood that I was a bad person. And I think about that sometimes. And here's me laying down on the floor for you, that I'm kind of not a great person. And this is how but also we're all going to move past that. Like, I'm going to like name this flaw of mine to lampshade it, excuse it, like proceed along and continue to try to manipulate people.
It is genuinely so scary to think of, like, she calls it out immediately. She says, quote, his wry deprecation really disarmed me. But she is aware that he's doing it, and what she wants so badly more than anything is to see him, like, quote, laid bare. That she's fascinated by this guy and she wants to see all aspects of him, and she wants to see him in her bed, and like what she wants more than anything is to see him laid bare and like stripped of all of that and stripped of all of the charm and the deprecation and whatever. And she says that's the one thing she never gets. She sees him in every other way, but she never sees him laid bare, and that like will always separate them. Like she will never have that true level of intimacy with her fourth boyfriend.
Always emotionally unavailable.
I love the line where she says it seemed like he was like prepared to catch a spear out of the dart.
Mm-hmm.
Like he is ready to go. And I think it is a little bit mirrored by, Penelope said that when he came back, his hands didn't shake. She's like, do not be confused. This is not a man with PTSD. Like this is a man who was so fucking thoroughly built for this. And I think in this moment, I think you read this and you're like, oh, he's so traumatized. Like that's why he can't let his guard down. And I think in this moment, reading those two things in conjunction with each other, you're a little bit like, no, he's all guard. Like that is just what and who he is in a way.
Mm-hmm. I always think whenever somebody mentions something like that, I always think of Matilda. Like you have so much extra brain energy that you're like just wired for this one thing that you're not doing. Then you can like do magic with your brain because that's how much energy you have left over.
Mm-hmm.
It's like him right now. I think of Carter as having Matilda brain too. But our podcast keeps you satiated so you don't do like telekinesis.
I don't do telekinesis all the time.
Yeah. If you guys don't record for long enough, Carter sends things flying.
Starts doing Scarlet Witch.
Yeah, Carrie.
Yeah.
Because of this fascination and this like fact that she wants to like get to know her fourth boyfriend, she turns his men back into men and she invites them to stay. And so now we have this whole section where Odysseus is staying on the island. We know this happens in the Odyssey. Throughout this whole section, he like recounts to her the events of the Odyssey. And so we are like really bullet point hearing about Achilles. We're hearing about the Trojan horse, about the winds blowing them off course, about the Cyclops. And I find myself like skimming these things, which I feel like is intentional.
Yeah, we last week had a discussion about the way that myth is recounted in these, where I think there is some level of character development here. Like this moment where part of his telling of the Trojan War is shouting out Patroclus is, I think, not purely a commercial move on the part of Madeline Miller, but also an attempt to try to show how he thinks about the world as being divided into good people and real people or whatever, useful people. But like, there are a lot of sections where I kind of feel like we're doing it to do it, doing it in case you didn't do the background reading or for some reason reading Circe without having exposed yourself to commonly told subsections of the Iliad. Circe takes particular interest in his telling about the gods being involved, because she's curious about the tales of mortals, but we're kind of at this pivot point in the book where we're going to start to care more about what the Olympians are up to and what they're doing. And this is, I think, her way of trying to prime that pump and get us wondering about what Athena is up to and how she works a bit. That's a generous reading. Some of this, I feel like just Heike doesn't have to be here.
I also think that because of decisions she makes down the line that have to do with her being like a political pawn in the war between the gods and the Titans, that she is starting to really become aware of like, what are the gods fighting for? Like, what do they care about? Like, how can I use my punishment as like a bargaining tool in that grander scheme of things? Throughout the storytelling, I mean, we've mentioned it already, like he is like the great storyteller. His self-deprecating humor is all part of like the way that he is able to speak. And it's interesting because sometimes he recounts things just to Circe in a way. There's a line where she says it was as if he was reciting a recipe for meat, which talking about like all of the horrible things that had happened to him and his men, like the storms blowing them off course and pissing off Athena and all of that. But then when he's recounting these stories more intentionally, and also for his men, when he's like telling the tales of everything that they had been through for like a crowd, she says, when he talked, he was a lawyer, a bard, and crossroads charlatan all at once, arguing his case, entertaining, pulling back the veil to show you the secrets of the world. These were no songs to sing before a court, no tales from the great golden age, yet somehow in his mouth they did not seem dishonorable, but just and inspired and wisely pragmatic. What I find scary is the difference between when he's reciting these things like a recipe for meat and when he is turning on the charlatan, the lawyer, the bard. Like, it is something that he is actively aware of. And therefore, again, like, we feel like we know him, but also do we know him? We can never really see him laid bare. But they, at the same time, like, I think we've been kind of critical of him. They have this really great relationship. Like, they are essentially playing house at this point. This is her first experience with domesticity in this sense. Like, it's like all of a sudden she walked into this marriage and this marriage came with children. She has like all of these grown men to take care of. The two of them are very much like mother and father of the house. She starts asking him to do little things. He starts doing acts of service for her. They're like taking care of the island together. It's like so much so to the point where she starts to think about marriage.
Yeah, it's really a whole different level. Not like there's all these relational things. I also, you know, our brand as a podcast has shifted a little bit. I would be remiss to not talk about the language of attraction that she's really different from what she uses for almost everybody else in the book, where it's not about whether or not he's attractive. She, like, her attraction, it's becoming relational. This idea about him being undone is enacted in ways that it's clear that it's not just like, this is a person who has desirable qualities. She has specific ideas about like what she wants their actual relationship to be, and like configurations, not physical configurations necessarily, but like emotional, relational configurations that are attractive, that they could occupy because of the like unique contours of who they are as people. Do you know what I mean? I feel like this is like markedly different from everything else. Where Daedalus, she was like, this is a person who's interesting, and I'm here, I'm curious, we can try this out. Hermes, it's also like a, okay, he has these things that are objectively great about him.
But here she says, I had once told Daedalus I would never marry because my hands were dirty and I liked my work too much. But this was a man with his own dirty hands.
They're twin flames. There is, yeah, something about her that he understands. Like, I think that a lot of these, I think men that she's meeting think of women or even goddesses as something so completely different from men. Mm-hmm. But I think that like Odysseus as a traumatized man, like as a man with no autonomy, can very much, I think, relate to the situation of a woman in exile. And so I think because they have that kind of commonality and he has this kind of intelligence that I think it's like stimulating for both of them.
And he's also like boy with older sister who actually respects women in the sense that he grew up under the eye of Athena and he is familiar with goddesses, powerful women, like these women like dictating his life. I think that's the thing that separates him from most of the other boys.
Well, there is that. I would say that the real separator is that he's actually a wife guy and the wife already did all the work, even though she's not here toiling away back home waiting.
Someone cooked here, you know?
Yeah. Penelope.
He's already been prepared to serve in this role.
I want to say, not only do we get these stories as they're playing house about the Odyssey, we get the story of Penelope and Telemachus, and that kind of shatters the fantasy.
I could like think about it for hours and hours and hours. I think what is such a incredible success that Madeline Miller pulls off here is that in the same way that Circe seeks to understand Odysseus and never really does, I don't think we do either. Like the portrait that we get of him through her perspective is so deeply different than what Penelope and Telemachus come to her island with. And we kind of get like everybody is getting these third-hand accounts. Some of them are from him. Some of them are from his family. And we kind of get this like really mismatched and extremely complicated picture of him. Like it seems like when he talks to her, Circe, he talks about these horrible things he's done, but he's so good at talking that they don't seem that horrible. But then Penelope says every word out of his mouth was a lie. And you kind of just like slowly start. It's sort of, I think, like sometimes you have this kind of like traumatizing thing at the end of relationships where it goes really poorly and you feel like you never knew each other. And I think that like in a way everybody is experiencing that, like in their relationship with Odysseus, where like at the end of it, everyone's like, I have no idea what that was. I really like, he's of many turnings.
And that's why he's the fourth boyfriend situationship that only lasts for 8 months, but ruins you for the rest of your life.
Right. Like, it's like, you know, like it's so much. I see this so often. Like people online say like, oh, I dated one guy for 5 years and I broke up with him and I moved on 2 days later. And then I had a situationship for a month and I never got over it ever again. And it's like, yeah, because you knew your boyfriend. You didn't know this person. Like, you know, like you had answers and now you have only questions.
I feel like that maybe is what also will help us to explain what's going on later on, in the sense that like Circe can see some level of this performance versus non-performance, on versus off for him, but also he's never laid bare. I think there is that like a very meaningful level to which he is never actually letting it all hang out with her in a way that perhaps he does with Penelope. Like I do get the sense that even though he's, you know, like not faithful, trifling, etc., like he does seem to actually have mentally some sort of unique understanding of his relationship with Penelope in a way that, I mean, we don't see it. Like it's really hard for us to make this judgment, but we might guess potentially that he is raw and real in the confines of marriage with her in a way that's like bad, though, in a way where like he hasn't in a way that makes actually me feel done jealous. This for years. Like it's something that you would be jealous of from the outside, but also like might explain why Penelope is like so, after everything is said and done, like not like profoundly displeased with the way that everything is shaken out and feeling like it wasn't, I don't know, like but especially like if we get the sense that he's like only really like he hasn't been himself for like 20 years and then suddenly he's like 20 years deeper into his trauma and like decides he's just gonna not, I don't know, play nice or something. Like I feel like if you imagine, I can understand how things might go astray along these lines potentially.
I think also in this section here we have something about destiny like hanging on him.
Oh yeah, like seaweed.
Yeah, like I think that, and like you kind of see this throughout like a lot of storytelling and a lot of the ways in which we talk about people who changed history. And I do think Odysseus is kind of like in my opinion, at least, like the most important mythic figure, like almost maybe I was going to say Jesus, but you know, depending on, you know, how you feel about it.
I called this book the Bible. We're fine.
Great. Okay. So essentially, like, you know, like I think it is hard for everyone to grapple with how large Odysseus's destiny is. Everybody in his life feels pushed out by the amount of space that needs to be made for his destiny. You know, like when you really get the retrospective here, like there are so many prophecies on him. He is the person who ended the Iliad. Like he is the greatest of the Greeks. He did make it through all of this. Like his death is foreshadowed and all that. Like, yeah, I mean, like on a certain level, I'm like, yeah, of course he's not like a good boyfriend, you know, because there's no room for anybody in his life besides him and his fate.
Yeah.
And I think there is like, you see, there's a frustration in him that he knows that. Like when he gets back from the underworld, he's like, I know how I'm going to die. Don't really know what it means. Like such bullshit. He's everybody's plaything, you know? And Athena even says that, you know, she's like, damn, we kind of used him up.
Speaking of the fate and the prophecies and how so much of it hangs on him, I thought it was very interesting that the prophecy that Hermes speaks to her is there's a guy named Odysseus and he's coming to your island. And she says, that's stupid. And then eventually Circe says to Odysseus, they told me you were coming and that you were coming to my island. And he's like, that's it. That's the dullest prophecy I've ever heard.
That's because he's heard 30.
Yeah, he's heard
like,
30.
Yeah.
But also, like, is that empowering to the both of them? That, like, here is a moment for them that they can shape themselves. That, like, we knew this was coming, but it is not foretold, like, how this is going to go. And that is exciting for them.
Yeah. I think he's lying there. Like, I think that's a little bit of, like, you know, like, forced humility. Like I like it does seem to me a little bit that he's kind of like, oh, that's dumb, little old me. It's like, yeah, dude, you know, You're the only guy anybody talks about for the rest of the book.
That it's only such a simple statement because for him, this is just one line in his like 50-line prophecy.
Think about it. I mean, like, this is such a magnifying glass put on Circe as a character, but like the 5 years that I spent reading the Odyssey, this is like 3 or 4 pages.
Yeah.
You know, like, I do think it's possible. Yeah. Also that's a little bit of a wink in the way that it's like this in a way is one of the biggest parts of her entire life. And this is one of like the 200 worst things that happened to him.
Oof.
This is low-key actually the only like 2 good months of his life.
Yes, absolutely. I want to follow the knife just to clean up with those rest of those quotes. Once they've been together for a while, she says, "A knife I had named him, but I saw that he was sliced down to the bone. I felt an answering ache in my chest. When I had taken him to my bed, it had been a kind of dare. But the feeling that flickered in me now was much older. There he was, his flesh open before me. This is something torn that I can mend."
Ooh, girl.
Ooh. Can we get an ooh, girl?
Ooh, girl.
And then later when he is talking to her about Penelope, she says, "The word slid into me smooth as a polished knife. I had known he loved her from the moment he'd spoken of her weaving, yet he had stayed month after month, and I had let myself be lulled. Now I saw more clearly. All those nights in my bed had only been his traveler's wisdom. When you were in Egypt, you worship Isis. When in Anatolia, you kill a lamb for Cybele. It does not trespass on your Athena still at home." Even the turning and all of those different statements with the knife, like so many different phases and feelings for him and like confusion about whether he loves her or doesn't or what. But then we get to Apollo coming and delivering this prophecy saying that, you know, Odysseus needs to go into this like entrance to the underworld, whatever. He's going to come back and hear about his fate and how he's going to die. And I think we would be remiss not to discuss Apollo's brief appearance in this book. I think it's hilariously in line with the Riordan verse depiction of Apollo. It's like basically identical.
I think that's fair.
I like all the depictions of the gods in this. I think they're all really great. But I think the thing that I liked about this one is that right before he shows up, everything turns into music. Like a raindrop hits the ground and it sounds like a note. And she's like, "Oh no." Like, I really do love within this book such a feeling of foreboding surrounding all of the gods.
Yeah.
And she talks about them being dead, like far more dead than humans are. You know, they all kind of have a little bit of like a zombie-ish quality to them.
Yeah, they feel like villains in a horror movie. I also think that the depiction of like the gift of prophecy from Apollo as being this very, very violent, violating thing is pretty in line with how we have talked about it before in the Riordan verse. And that it's like, unfortunately, what like makes this section of PTSD like come to a close with her like once again being violated by this like act of prophecy, which is described as being like coming into her body and like coming out of her without her being like having any control over it or any say in it. She is absolutely pissed off that Apollo would do this to her and her own island. It bothers me. I feel like we're undoing all of the progress and the healing that we went through over the past couple chapters.
It's in line with Cassandra of Troy as well. That like she refused him and he violated her with prophecy.
Well, Odysseus comes back and finds out that he's going to die of the sea while walking on land. We don't know what that means yet, that he's going to have to pass by the island where Helios keeps all of his bulls. And so Circe, knowing now that he's going to leave, fulfills her final role that she plays in the Odyssey as like the guide, as like benevolent hostess who's going to tell him now, like help him on his journey, warn him about Scylla, warn him about not landing on the island, warning about the sirens, giving him the idea very briefly. Like we go through all this so quickly, like we said, like bullet pointing. These are all the things we've already known in our culture, so we don't really have to expound upon them. And then like very quickly, he is gone. It's like out of here. She feels him leaving before he's even left. She knows that she can't hold on to him. She says, "Odysseus, son of Laertes, the great traveler, prince of wiles and tricks and 1,000 ways. He showed me his scars, and in return he let me pretend that I had none. He stepped onto his ship, and when he turned back to look for me, I was gone." Which feels like a little Orpheus and Eurydice type beat. Just a little, I don't know, tragic, we'll never be together. Like we should have known how this story was going to end when it began, that we would be separated and that this was never going to last. So my question for Kyle and Carter, you could also answer if you want, is if this book is essentially the Bible, this is the story of a god like learning to be a human and to walk on earth among the mortals. And this section of chapters is one parable. What is the lesson that we are getting out of this section? What's the moral of the story on our quest to learn how to be a human woman?
Yeah. I think the lesson that comes out of this, honestly, for her and maybe for all of us and everyone, is that I don't think closure's real. And I think like that is really what Odysseus does bring here. He sort of like annoyingly, and like, you know, clearly this comes up again, but he denies closure to everyone who knows him and interacts with him. Like every single person who is a part of his life is sort of systematically denied any real understanding of who he is or what he wants. Like even the people close to him, even his wife, even his son. And I think like that's what screws Circe up so much, I think, like this through this encounter, is that he is so unwilling to be simple in any way.
You will never get closure from your fourth boyfriend.
Your fourth boyfriend will be the worst one.
Yeah,
I think that's basically it. Something like your fourth boyfriend situationship is like a canon event, I guess, also. Well, because it's also not like she should have avoided this.
No, she had to go through it. And it also did help her heal.
Yeah.
Like, even though she does not get closure from this, and even though, you know, she does not necessarily get closure from her trauma by enacting vengeance, these are things we must go through.
Like, Odysseus is helping her to get better, but not because he's like a healthy influence or because he's good for her, if that makes any sense. It's just that this toxic experience is something that she must have in her life. And I think that is just the best outlook that is possible for her to have. And that's also part of the learning experience. For her to go through this and be like, you know, that was the best version of that. He can't give me anything else. He could never have given me anything else. Next one.
Also, just because he was a lawyer and a bard and a charlatan does not mean you didn't love him and he did not have feelings for you.
Yeah.
Things are complicated. Closure is a myth. Nuance is real. And that is mortality in a way. Like, she's used to these very black and white world of the gods. It does almost feel like the gods can't lie. Like you were saying, Kyle, not only can the Greeks not lie, but the gods can't either. Yeah. But Odysseus introduces that gray area to her.
I feel like the idea of a fourth boyfriend is a mortal thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know?
I also think that like it's shown like she's kind of similar to him in the sense that she's a god with a mortal's voice. Like she's also kind of a double talker in a way.
I love that. Yeah. Oh, well, that's on fourth boyfriends. And there will be more in the future because that's what happens when you give a woman unlimited time. Next week, we're going to be on chapters 18 through 20. So that's your next assigned reading, chapters 18 through 20. Kyle, would you like to promote one of 1,000 things that you are a part of and tell people where they can find you on the internet?
Yes, you can find me at Kyle Prue on all social media platforms. That's a good way to find my stuff. But watch my YouTube show, Rabbit, and acquaint yourself and prepare yourself for season 2, which is coming sometime in the future.
Yay, Rabbit! Woohoo! I feel like Rabbit is like the same age as our podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Seaweed Brain, I think, might be maybe like a year older. I remember recording for the first time in Florida. I guess we're going on like 4 years almost.
Nice.
Crazy how these, it's like having a kid. Really.
Yes. Go support Kyle's toddler the way you support our toddler. And we'll talk about childhood and motherhood next week, speaking of. So we'll see you guys then. Thanks, Kyle, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, y'all.